Today we face a specific problem that has persisted for decades. Most readers and scholars of the Bible have encountered a dual interpretation of the texts we will analyze today. This interpretation is not only dissonant and confusing, but also contradictory. On this occasion, we will present solutions from various perspectives that different academic disciplines can offer. Then we have two texts that disturb us, which are 2 Samuel 24:1-2 and 1 Chronicles 21:1-2. The first reads as follows.
Later, God's anger blazed forth against Israel. So he incited David to move against them by telling him, "Go, take a census of Israel and Judah." So the king ordered Joab, commander of the special forces who was with him, "Go throughout the tribes of Israel, from Dan to Beersheba, and take a census of the people, so I can be made aware of the total number."
In other words, the Lord instructed David to carry out a census according to this account, and he said to Joab, the commander of the army who was with him, to now go through all the tribes of Israel from Dan to Beersheba. This is an expression used to indicate from the north to the south, and conducts a census of the population so that I may know how many people there are. This is what the second book of Samuel mentions. Therefore, in the text of 2 Samuel, the one who drives and is behind the scenes, manipulating the strings for the census to take place, is Jehovah. Very well, now we will proceed to read the following text, which addresses the same event, the same king, the same general, and the same census, but it is a different text. 1 Chronicles 21:1-2, it says,
Then Satan attacked Israel by inciting David to enumerate a census of Israel. David ordered Joab and the commanders of the army, "Go take a census of Israel from Beersheba to Dan, and bring me a report so I can be aware of the total number."
It is important to clarify the location and meaning of Beersheba and Dan. From Beersheba, located in the south, to Dan, situated in the north, it is essential for readers to understand what the term Beersheba to Dan refers to, which is an explanation that addresses the entire extent of the territory and geographical distance from north to south, highlighting its significance. However, consider the questions raised by Joab.
But Joab replied, "May the Lord your God increase the population of the people 100-fold, while your majesty, the king, is still alive to see it happen. But why does your majesty, the king, want to do this?"
That is to say, what is the reason behind your desire to take this action? This does not align with David's intentions. Next, we will examine the reasons and subsequently pose a second question. Are they not all your servers anymore? Why do you wish to take such action? There are two very interesting questions that we often overlook when reading, but if we consider them seriously as keys to interpretation, they help us understand the text. In this second narrative, the question arises of who is truly behind the manipulation of events. Instead of being a neutral figure, Satan is now presented as the promoter of the censorship, in contrast to the claim that Jehovah is the one who drives it. Both narratives refer to the same Jewish people and are documented in the Bible, which creates confusion. It is disconcerting that the same event is attributed to Jehovah in one text and to Satan in another. What does this mean? We must engage in an intellectual exercise that allows us to return to that time, as there is no other way. This is not about a spiritual reading. To understand the text, it is necessary to attempt to travel to the past and analyze it from that perspective. That is, understanding what occurs in that context. It is essential to consider the objections I have pointed out separately, as they are crucial for understanding the narrative. The objections raised by the king through Joab are as follows. Why does my lord wish to conduct a census? Joab discreetly advises David to reconsider this action, as it is quite foolish. In other words, what David is attempting to undertake makes no sense. It is important to remember that David and Joab, according to available accounts, are first cousins. However, I have my doubts about this familial relationship. In fact, from my perspective, I can argue against it, although I do not have the necessary time to do so. From my viewpoint, the people did not desire David. It was I who spoke and had, of course, grounds to support my conclusion. However, this is not the issue at hand at this moment. What we must understand is that I represent the people, while David symbolizes the political class, and Joab represents the populace. Joab questions David, asking, "Is not the people already your servant?" In other words, what do you intend to achieve with this if they are already your subjects? When referring to subjects, he does not mean slaves, but rather individuals who work to serve the king. Joab clarifies and shouts at him, questioning David and reminding him that the people have already shown him obedience and pay tribute. There is no need to exert further pressure on them. Why add more tax and obedience burdens when they are already fulfilling their duties? However,
but the king's order overruled Joab and the commanders of the special forces. So Joab and the commanders of the special forces left David's presence to take a census of the people of Israel.
In other words, the king's desire prevailed over the people's outcry, represented by Joab in this narrative. David's intransigence, intolerance, and obstinacy were more powerful than the resistance and demands of the people, also represented by Joab. David is unconcerned with Joab's questioning, as Joab is not part of the royalty but belongs to the popular classes, particularly the working military class. On the other hand, David represents the elite and royalty. In this context, Joab raises the legitimate doubts of the people, but David, indifferently, chooses to ignore them. Next, we will examine what happens. The question we pose is the following: why is the census carried out in the first 5 verses of the chapter in both accounts? In these, it is mentioned that, after traversing the entire land, all the families of Israel were counted. This process took almost 10 months, and it can be argued that David should have cancelled this project, which turned out to be a burden for the people. However, his obstinacy prevailed, and he did not stop at any moment. Although the account does not explicitly mention it, it is likely that David did so reluctantly and with sadness, after expressing his disagreement by asking why it was necessary to carry it out, given that they were already serving the people. Joab, the commander, presented the results to David, indicating that, according to the book of Samuel, there were 1,300,000 men of combat age among the 12 tribes of Israel. If this number were correct, we would be talking about at least 6, 7, or 8 million people. In the parallel account of Chronicles, it is mentioned that there were 1,100,000 and almost 500,000 in Judah. It is important to note that the figures of 1 million are presented confusingly. If we consider 1,600,000 or 500,000, we are talking about a range of 7 to 8 million. The central issue is that the censuses in antiquity did not have the same objectives or purposes as current censuses. Today, a census in our countries seeks to understand the demographic profile of the population, that is, how many men and women are in a household, how many adults and children, as well as the economic profile, which includes the possession of appliances such as televisions and refrigerators, and the type of housing. In summary, the objective of a census today is to analyze the demographic, economic, social, and religious profile of citizens in order to formulate appropriate policies. Often, we fall into the error of anachronistic projecting these practices into the past. It is considered that, in ancient times, when it is mentioned that the king will conduct a census, this serves a purpose similar to the current one, and the response is negative. In the past, carrying out a census implied an increase in the tax rate for those who were counted, specifically individuals over 20 years of age. Not the entire family is counted, but only the men who exceed this age, as they are the ones obligated to pay income taxes. For this reason, the text mentions that there was a large number of individuals of military age, given that, starting at 20 years, men are recruited for war. What the text suggests is that there were 1,100,000 people, or a similar figure, which is evidently exaggerated. However, the main message is that David not only attempts but also orders Joab to conduct the census of the people, with the intention of increasing taxes. Joab, who represents the people, questions the decision to raise taxes. He asks why the tax burden should be increased on those who are already your servants, that is, those who are already contributing with their taxes and working for it. The question is, why impose more taxes on them if they are already fulfilling their obligations? In the ancient world, the tax burden could reach almost 50%. Furthermore, the necessity of paying taxes to both the king and the temple is raised, considering that there are different types of taxes. I will not stop to sum all the taxes at this moment. However, if all the taxes owed to both institutions, political and religious, are considered, the fiscal burden reaches almost 50%. It is considerably more than what we currently pay in our countries, where the rate varies between 17% and 21%, depending on the country. In Peru, the rate is 18%, which already seems excessive to us. We would prefer to pay between 12% and 14%. This has led millions of people to work outside the law, without the supervision of authorities, as they consider the 18% to be absurd and abusive. This situation is repeated throughout Latin America, where millions of compatriots work without issuing tax receipts, as they find the rates of 18%, 15%, 19%, or 20% imposed by our politicians or the state to be exorbitant. Imagine having to pay 50% in taxes. In our case, that could lead to a heart attack or fainting. In ancient Israel, 50% was paid. What happens? David wants to raise taxes. So, I ask him, why do you want to do this, David? Joab represents the people. This narrative, although it may not have historically occurred, attempts to illustrate the dialectic and conflict between the political class, which collects taxes, and the popular class, which pays them. The political class wants to increase taxes, while the popular class questions why more fiscal burdens are imposed when they are already contributing. This antagonism reflects the class problem between the elite and the working class, which is the core of this narrative. In this context, it is essential not to focus on whether the responsibility falls on Jehovah or Satan, as the true issue lies in the struggle for survival among the lower classes in the face of taxes that disproportionately affect the most disadvantaged. It is crucial to recall that when an individual is unable to pay their taxes, the king has the authority to claim their children, who then become slaves. If the children fail to settle the debt, the parents themselves also fall into slavery under the king. This very situation is precisely what the prophets denounce in chapters 1, 2, and 3 of Isaiah. Furthermore, it is important to consider the account of the prophet Elijah, who encounters a widow expressing distress because the king's creditors are coming to seize her children due to her inability to pay. In response, Elisha reassures her and seeks a way to provide her with financial relief. Through a series of miracles, he enables the widow to acquire certain goods that she can sell in order to repay her creditor. The phenomenon of tyrants is not exclusive to Israel, as it has been observed throughout antiquity. Often, when reading the Bible, we adopt a romantic perspective that prevents us from recognizing the defects of the characters. For example, both David and Solomon are presented as tyrannical kings in the biblical accounts. Although I do not have the capacity to judge historical events, the account suggests that David is not an idealized character. In the narrative, David is not a pure figure. He is described as a kidnapper, a warrior who extorts, steals, and lies. Refusing to acknowledge these aspects is a separate issue. Similarly, the figure of Solomon presents similar characteristics. The situation presented is a clear dilemma between two conflicting groups. On one hand, the political elite that advocates for an increase in taxes to improve their quality of life, and on the other hand, an exploited and oppressed people who ask, "What more can I pay? I cannot allow you more deductions, since I am working for you. In fact, I am practically your slave, your servant. Where else do you expect me to get money?" This approach highlights the tension between the demands of the ruling class and the basic needs of the population, which is reflected in the dynamics of power. It is crucial to observe the consequences of these interactions, as illustrated through the story of David.
1 Chronicles 21:8. David responded to God, "I sinned greatly by behaving this way, but now I am asking you, please remove the guilt of your servant, since I have acted very foolishly." 2 Samuel 24:10. Later, David's conscience bothered him after he had numbered the army. So David told the Lord, "I have sinned greatly by what I did. But now I am asking you, please remove the guilt of your servant, since I have acted very foolishly."
The text suggests that the reader understands the census implies an added burden for the population. After David took the census, it is mentioned that the tax burden also increased, which weighed on the people's heart. David turned to Jehovah, acknowledging his grave sin for this action and asking for forgiveness. It is important to note this is not a divine initiative, as David seeks Jehovah's forgiveness. Though 2 Samuel mentions Jehovah instructed David to take the census, the account later indicates David feels guilty and begs for his sins' removal, admitting he imposed tributes on the people. This text posits that information is not fully revealed by the author, presented symbolically for reader understanding. More interpretive keys are needed to grasp the author's final message. A significant image is mentioned, a red hand representing the king, be it David or any monarch, symbolizing royalty. Here, the hand also represents the people, and when the king decides to take a census, it implies greater pressure on the population. Two narratives exist in the Bible. Samuel mentions Jehovah's anger flared against Israel, and Jehovah incited David to take the census. Conversely, Chronicles states Satan provoked David. Both narratives address the census, but differ on responsibility attribution, suggesting interpretation depends on the analyzed text's perspective. At the start of 2 Samuel, the text appears manipulated by the political regime. A politician may justify tax hikes, claiming this decision stems from Jehovah to increase state financial revenue. Thus, the ruler avoids direct responsibility for the tax burden on the people, shifting blame to divinity. This justification mechanism is effective. Since Jehovah is invisible to citizens and not present to be questioned, the population cannot directly express discontent. Here, Jehovah's name serves as an excuse, allowing rulers to strip citizens of economic resources without immediate repercussions. In contrast, 1 Chronicles authors show greater awareness and empathy for the people's feelings. The Chronicles writer notes that while taxes can rise, this action should not be justified by claiming it is Jehovah's mandate. The tax hike represents a burden, leading to hunger for citizens and families, depriving them of scarce resources. Therefore, one should not claim Jehovah orders this deprivation, since, in this context, Satan, not the God of justice, truly drives this oppression. Two perspectives are seen: the oppressor, who tries to legitimize abuse with a supposed divine mandate, and the oppressed, who respond that their means reduction comes not from God, but from evil forces. For the latter, their true God hears the cries of the suffering, as seen in the Exodus account, a God concerned for the poor, not one who strips them of their merger livelihood. Two perspectives exist on the same event. The reason different promoters are assigned, such as Jehovah and Satan, depends on who is interpreting the text. For example, if someone takes my money and justifies it by saying it is in the name of Jehovah, the affected person will not accept it, as they are losing the little they have to live on. Thus, the affected person might argue that they do not believe it is really Jehovah who is acting in that way, but that it is a manipulation of Satan. Therefore, these two visions clash head-on, like a high-speed train. The question some students asked me was why there are contradictory accounts. The answer lies in the fact that these texts are written from different perspectives. One represents the politician who seeks to justify his theft from the poor using Jehovah's name, while the other is the voice of the one who defends their livelihood, affirming that Jehovah would not take away what they need, and that the true influence behind this action is Satan, who has risen up against the people. If you like this academic content, please press the like button and subscribe. Tell us, what do you think? What would add? Our Heavenly Father take care and give wisdom to you and your existence, to your mind and spirit.